The morning of April 9th, 1943, dawned over the English countryside with a pale, cold light cutting across the airfields near East Anglia. Pilots of the 8th Air Force readied their P-51B Mustangs, the newest addition to the Allied arsenal, while ground crews double-checked fuel lines, armaments, and Merlin engines that had become the centerpiece of American aerial hopes. Captain Richard "Dick" Tibbets, a young pilot recently transferred from the P-38 Lightning program, gripped the throttle of his Mustang with a sense of cautious anticipation. He had been briefed that intelligence reports consistently labelled the aircraft overrated in the Reichsmarschall's internal communiques. Yet here he was, climbing into the cockpit of a machine that promised to challenge the entire Luftwaffe hierarchy at altitude. For months, German commanders had relied on the reports from their Eastern Front aces and reconnaissance to evaluate Allied aircraft. In official documents, the P-51 was dismissed as a lightly armed, fragile fighter whose performance numbers had been inflated by American propaganda. Messerschmitt pilots routinely claimed that any Mustang could be outmaneuvered by a Bf-109G or Focke-Wulf 190A under favorable conditions. The irony, as the Americans were about to discover firsthand, lay in the brutal disconnect between German expectations and operational reality. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At the time, the European air war was defined by a delicate balance of range, firepower, and tactical doctrine. The Luftwaffe's strategy hinged on concentrated, high-speed interceptions of bomber streams, employing Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs that had been optimized for climb rate and altitude engagement. German intelligence assumed that their aircraft maintained supremacy above 20,000 feet, and that Allied long-range escort fighters could not sustain operations deep into the Reich. The P-51, recently introduced to England's forward bases, threatened to shatter both assumptions. Its Rolls-Royce Packard Merlin engine, a licensed copy of the British design, was fed by high-octane grade 150 fuel, allowing unprecedented acceleration and altitude performance. Yet the German perception persisted. In February of 1943, the Luftwaffe's fighter command issued a confidential report downplaying the Mustang's capabilities. Pilots were warned that its reported top speed of 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet was likely an overstatement, the product of optimistic Allied test engineers and propaganda leaflets distributed to U.S. airmen. Commanders maintained that engagements could be conducted with traditional tactics, vertical dives, climbing attacks, and coordinated formations without fear of technological surprise. They had underestimated the psychological and material shock that was about to sweep through their ranks. Across the Channel, the Allies had been quietly integrating lessons from the previous year's air campaigns. High-altitude bombing raids over Germany had exposed the limitations of existing fighter cover, and losses had mounted. The introduction of the Mustang was part of a calculated strategy to extend escort range, while gaining a speed advantage previously unavailable to the 8th Air Force. Pilots trained rigorously in formation tactics, gunnery precision, and energy management, yet they were unaware that the very aircraft they flew would soon redefine what the Luftwaffe considered survivable in the air. By May of 1943, the first P-51B squadrons reached England. Ground crews meticulously monitored the integration of the Merlin engine with grade 150 fuel, each drop of gasoline representing a tactical edge the Germans could not replicate. The British had pioneered the research into high-octane blends, but American production capacity had made sustained combat deployment possible. By contrast, German synthetic fuel programs, dependent on the hydrogenation of coal, could not deliver quantities suitable for frontline fighters without risking catastrophic shortages in other sectors. The disparity was technical but with immediate operational consequences. Allied fighters could climb faster, accelerate more rapidly, and maintain combat readiness at altitudes where German pilots had previously held uncontested superiority. Despite these developments, Luftwaffe intelligence remained constrained by assumptions rather than observation. The reports filtered up through officer channels noted that the P-51's performance might be adequate, but not revolutionary. The aircraft's range was believed to be limited to a few hundred miles over enemy territory, and its durability under heavy fire was dismissed as marginal. Such assumptions would soon collide with the realities of actual combat. On June 12, 1943, Tibbets and his squadron were tasked with a long-range escort mission over the Ruhr industrial region. The flight plan required crossing 300 miles of hostile airspace, where Luftwaffe fighter bases were concentrated. The mission exemplified the new tactical philosophy: escort the B-17 and B-24 bombers to their targets, maintain high-altitude cover, and exploit the Mustang's superior performance to prevent German fighters from disrupting the formation. As the Mustangs climbed through 20,000 feet, German radar operators detected the formation but underestimated its speed and cohesion. Messerschmitt pilots scrambled, expecting the interception to be routine. The initial encounter, lasting less than 20 minutes, would prove the magnitude of the miscalculation. The Mustang's acceleration allowed pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. German formations found themselves reacting to maneuvers rather than initiating attacks. Standard dogfighting tactics, diving attacks, followed by vertical disengagements, failed against the P-51's combination of engine performance, laminar flow wings, and energy retention at altitude. Observers in subsequent after-action reports noted that Luftwaffe pilots were often forced into defensive circles, unable to escape pursuit without exposing themselves to concentrated fire from the bomber escort. The psychological impact was immediate. Commanders who had publicly labelled the Mustang overrated were confronted with contradictory evidence. Their pilots returned, reporting an aircraft that seemed faster, more resilient, and more versatile than intelligence had predicted. Casualty reports showed that bomber losses during these escort missions were beginning to decrease, not due to improved German incompetence, but because of a new variable that had not been properly accounted for: American material, superiority, and the precise engineering of the P-51 airframe. By midsummer of 1943, the term overrated began to vanish from internal Luftwaffe communiques, replaced with cautious acknowledgement of a technological advantage the Reich could not easily match. In interviews conducted after the war, Luftwaffe aces like Heinz Baer and Walter Krupinski reflected on this period with a mixture of disbelief and respect. Baer noted that the Mustang forced a re-evaluation of aerial tactics, remarking that we could not simply climb or dive our way to advantage. The Americans were controlling the fight with power we could not counter. By late July 1943, the Mustang's reputation had begun to ripple through both Allied and German commands, though the full extent of its impact remained invisible to anyone not flying it. 8th Air Force records show that the 4th Fighter Group, operating out of Debden and stationed with P-51B Mustangs, had conducted nearly 20 long-range escort missions over Germany, with significantly reduced bomber attrition compared to comparable operations in the spring. Detailed mission logs indicate that bomber loss rates fell from roughly 12% per sortie in early June to under 6% by late July. The difference was not luck. It was the P-51's combination of speed, climb, rate, and range. During one such mission on July 17, 1943, a formation of 32 Mustangs escorted 60 B-17 Flying Fortresses toward the industrial city of Kassel. At 23,000 feet, German radar detected the approaching formation, and JG-11s scrambled 32 Bf-109 G6 fighters. Messerschmitt commanders anticipated a standard engagement: climb, intercept, attack the bombers, disengage. What they encountered instead was a stark demonstration of material and tactical superiority that challenged everything they had been taught. The P-51 seconds climbed in formation, maintaining precise positional discipline while accelerating beyond previously documented speeds for operational escort fighters. German pilots reported being unable to close on the bombers without first evading the Mustang escorts. Standard vertical maneuvers, once considered decisive, failed. The energy retention of the Mustangs at high altitude allowed American pilots to enter or exit fights on their own terms. Luftwaffe squadron reports describe unexpectedly high closing speeds and uncontrollable pursuit vectors, a euphemistic way of acknowledging that the P-51 seconds dictated every engagement. In a debriefing after the mission, Major John C. Meyer, one of the squadron leaders, wrote that the Bf-109 seconds were surprised at every turn. They did not anticipate the acceleration, nor the altitude performance. The Mustang's presence allowed us to manage both offensive and defensive positioning without risk to the bombers. These operational reports highlight a subtle but profound shift. The psychological advantage of being able to control the terms of combat without overextending risked undermining German confidence in both their aircraft and their tactical doctrine. German commanders struggled to understand the anomaly. Intelligence officers initially argued that the P-51's performance gains could be explained by experimental fuel or exaggeration in pilot reports. This hypothesis had merit. Allied chemists had indeed developed high-octane aviation fuel grade 150 that produced a measurable increase in engine output for the Merlin-powered Mustangs. Standard Packard Merlin engines could generate approximately 1,490 horsepower at military power with conventional grade 130 fuel, but with grade 150, output increased to nearly 1,600 horsepower under war emergency settings. The boost translated into roughly 25 additional miles per hour at altitude and improved climb rates of 300 to 500 feet per minute, depending on load. The Luftwaffe, reliant on synthetic coal-derived fuels such as B4 or C3, could not match these numbers without significant industrial overhaul, which was impossible under wartime constraints. The reality was undeniable during a second engagement over Hamburg on August 2, 1943. A formation of Mustangs, led by Colonel Donald Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group, intercepted a mixed force of Fokker-Wulf 190 AS and Bf-109 seconds, attempting to disrupt a bomber stream. Observers noted that German pilots were consistently outmaneuvered at both high and medium altitudes. Blakesley's Mustangs employed high-speed slashing attacks, diving from superior altitude, making firing passes, and then using superior acceleration to disengage without risk. Reports from Luftwaffe pilots captured in post-war interrogations indicate that their aircraft were often overrun during dives intended to initiate combat, forcing them into defensive circles rather than offensive maneuvers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Mustang's laminar flow wing design, developed by Edgar Schmude's engineering team at North American Aviation, further magnified the aircraft's advantage. By reducing drag and optimizing high-speed airflow over the wing surfaces, the aircraft maintained energy through turns and dives better than anything the Luftwaffe had anticipated. German fighters, accustomed to exploiting performance advantages in vertical maneuvers, found themselves unable to convert potential energy into effective kinetic advantage. The tactical implications were immediate. Pilots who had previously relied on climb and dive superiority were now in a reactive position, attempting to regain initiative in a fight where the Mustang dictated the terms. Psychologically, the effect on German units was profound. Squadron diaries, such as those of JG-26 operating in northern France, reveal growing unease. Pilots were repeatedly instructed that the P-51's range and speed are not as reported, and that enemy reports exaggerate its capabilities. Yet first-hand encounters consistently contradicted these reassurances. One entry from Hauptmann Hans Schellhase in August 1943 notes, "Every engagement demonstrates a fighter beyond our calculations. We must adapt tactics rapidly, yet our formations crumble under the energy management of these Mustangs." The psychological cost was significant. Even seasoned aces with hundreds of confirmed victories found themselves challenged by a machine whose very existence called into question the assumptions underpinning German air doctrine. By autumn 1943, Allied bomber loss rates over Germany had begun to reflect the cumulative effect of Mustang operations. The 8th Air Force calculated that escorted missions now incurred roughly half the losses experienced in the same sectors 6 months prior. This operational outcome was a tangible demonstration of the psychological and material shift. German commanders who had dismissed the Mustang as overrated were witnessing a fighter that could consistently prevent them from achieving their primary objective: interception of Allied bombers. The consequences extended beyond the European airspace. German aircraft production, constrained by fuel shortages and increasingly targeted by Allied strategic bombing, could not keep pace with losses or with the technological demands imposed by the Mustang. Even when the Luftwaffe attempted to upgrade aircraft models or introduce new variants, such as the Focke-Wulf 190D or the TAR 152, these solutions were reactive, delayed, and unable to match the immediate performance characteristics of the P-51. In essence, the Allies had introduced a tactical and material advantage that could not be immediately neutralized, forcing German pilots and commanders into a perpetual state of catch-up. In November of 1943, Luftwaffe communications reveal the gradual acknowledgement of the Mustang's capabilities. Intercepted messages between commanders note the unexpected energy retention and extended operational range of the aircraft. Internal training manuals were revised, cautioning that conventional interception tactics could fail against the new threat. This marked the turning point. The term overrated was quietly excised from official documentation, replaced with strategic re-evaluation. By the time the 8th Air Force launched its raids in early 1944 in preparation for Operation Overlord, German fighters faced not only superior numbers, but also an aircraft whose performance had been systematically underestimated from the outset. Field reports describe German pilots' growing reliance on defensive tactics rather than aggressive interception. Squadron formations were tightened to protect vulnerable assets, often sacrificing offensive potential. Luftwaffe ace Günter Rahl later reflected in post-war interviews that the Mustang changed everything. "Our doctrines, built over years of Eastern Front experience, were no longer sufficient." Suddenly, speed and altitude alone could not guarantee survival or victory. Such admissions underscore the profound psychological shift imposed by the Mustang. A single, carefully engineered aircraft had disrupted entrenched operational paradigms and forced the enemy to confront a reality they had been trained to ignore. By the end of 1944, the Mustang's influence had extended beyond immediate air combat. Its presence enabled sustained bomber campaigns into the heart of Germany with reduced attrition, contributing materially to the degradation of German industrial output and morale. The Luftwaffe's inability to neutralize this technological advantage revealed systemic weaknesses: over-reliance on conventional doctrine, delayed industrial adaptation, and an underestimation of the Allied capacity for innovation and production. German commanders, once dismissive of the P-51, had been compelled to acknowledge the aircraft's superiority in both material and operational terms, illustrating a rare convergence of engineering, strategy, and human psychology in the midst of total war. By the winter of 1944, the operational reality of the P-51 Mustang had fully crystallized for both sides of the conflict. The aircraft had transitioned from a subject of skepticism and underestimation to an instrument that directly reshaped the European air war. The German commanders, who had once written off the Mustang as overrated, faced undeniable evidence. Bomber escort losses had plummeted. Their fighters were increasingly confined to defensive operations, and air superiority, long presumed to be achievable by maintaining vertical and speed advantages, was slipping from their grasp. The immediate aftermath of this shift was evident across the Luftwaffe. Units such as JG-26, JG-11, and A-2, JG-2, long considered elite formations, were forced to reconsider training doctrines, combat formations, and engagement criteria. Mission logs reveal repeated entries, emphasizing avoid frontal engagement, maintain group cohesion at all costs, and never pursue beyond Mustang contact range. These adjustments were defensive, reactive, and constrained by the very attributes of the P-51 that German intelligence had initially dismissed. High-altitude engagement, once a domain where Luftwaffe pilots expected to dictate encounters, became a trap. The Mustang's superior engine performance and laminar flow aerodynamics allowed American pilots to control altitude, speed, and maneuvering, leaving the Germans in a constant state of reaction. The psychological toll on German pilots was profound. Many seasoned aces, accustomed to exploiting climb rate advantages, superior diving speed, reported experiences that were, in effect, an inversion of their previous battlefield confidence. Luftwaffe memoirs and post-war interviews frequently note this shift. For instance, General Adolf Galland, commander of Jagdgeschwader 26, later described the period as a time when our men were no longer the masters of the sky. We were responding to the Mustang's initiative, not creating it. Such admissions reflect a deeper, systemic recognition that material engineering, combined with strategic production and fuel innovation, could impose a tactical reality that even the most experienced human operators could not easily counter. Beyond the immediate tactical consequences, the Mustang's influence had broader operational implications. The 8th Air Force, which had been constrained in earlier campaigns by the limited range of earlier escort fighters such as the P-38 Lightning or the P-47 Thunderbolt, could now project power deep into the Reich. Escort. Missions that previously terminated over the Belgian border could now extend to the Ruhr Valley, Berlin, and beyond, without leaving bombers exposed to unescorted attacks. The strategic outcome was stark. The industrial heart of Germany could no longer rely on geographic distance to provide protection from aerial bombardment. The Mustang had, in effect, neutralized a form of territorial advantage, imposing the psychological and material consequences of unmitigated air power on the German command. The technical reasons for this dominance were layered but well documented. The Packard-built Merlin engine, combined with grade 150 aviation fuel, produced sustained horsepower increases that translated directly into operational flexibility. At 25,000 feet, a P-51 could reach speeds approaching 450 miles per hour, exceeding the capabilities of the Bf-109G and FW-190A under similar conditions. Laminar flow wings minimized drag at high speed, maintaining energy in turns and dives, and allowing pilots to engage or disengage at will. Fuel capacity and efficient range management meant that escort missions could extend beyond the limitations imposed by earlier fighter designs, creating a sustained presence over hostile territory. These advantages were not theoretical. They were observable in sortie outcomes, aircraft loss ratios, and pilot testimonies. German commanders attempted technical and tactical countermeasures, though with limited success. The introduction of late-war aircraft, such as the Focke-Wulf 190D and the high-altitude TAR 152, represented attempts to reclaim speed and altitude superiority. However, production constraints, shortages of high-octane synthetic fuel, and the disruptive effects of Allied strategic bombing limited their availability and operational deployment. Even when deployed, These aircraft could not consistently neutralize the Mustang's advantages, as the P-51's combination of range, speed, and maneuverability allowed it to dictate engagements rather than respond to them. The broader implications of this technological and tactical imbalance were starkly evident in the planning and execution of the Normandy invasion in June 1944. Allied air superiority, ensured in part by Mustang escort operations, provided a critical enabler for airborne and amphibious operations. German ground and air forces, despite localized pockets of resistance, were unable to mount effective interdiction. Strategic bombing campaigns could continue with reduced attrition, directly impacting German production of tanks, artillery, and aircraft, and contributing to the eventual collapse of organized resistance in Western Europe. For the German command, the Mustang's influence was not merely operational but psychological. The repeated experience of confronting an aircraft previously dismissed as overrated eroded confidence in both intelligence assessments and doctrinal assumptions. Senior commanders faced a persistent cognitive dissonance. Their air doctrine had been formulated under assumptions about relative performance that no longer applied. Operational planning required recalibration under conditions where the enemy possessed both superior engineering and the capacity to maintain that advantage consistently over hundreds of missions. Individual accounts illustrate the human dimension of this shift. Walter Krupinski, a Luftwaffe ace with over 100 confirmed kills, recalled post-war that the Mustang was unlike anything we had fought before. We could not predict its energy. It was always faster when we expected it to be slower, always maneuverable when we assumed it would be rigid. Our tactics, learned and refined over years, were suddenly inadequate. Similarly, Heinz Baer described an experience on a long-range interception mission over the Ruhr, in which his unit attempted a dive attack only to find the Mustangs accelerating away in a controlled, deliberate manner, forcing German pilots to abandon offensive action. These personal narratives underscore the intersection of material superiority and psychological impact. Even experienced operators were compelled to adapt, often in real time, to realities they had previously discounted. The P-51's dominance extended beyond mere combat encounters to influence the broader strategic calculus of the Luftwaffe. Resource allocation became a critical concern. Units stationed in defensive roles over critical industrial zones had to contend with the persistent threat of Mustang escorts. Training programs were revised, emphasizing evasion, coordinated defensive formations, and avoidance of protracted engagements. Yet these adaptations were constrained by industrial limitations. Fuel shortages and attrition of experienced pilots meant that even revised tactics could not consistently counter the Mustang advantage. In reflecting on the P-51's legacy, it is clear that the aircraft achieved more than mere tactical superiority. It imposed a systemic shift on German air doctrine, compelling a re-evaluation of assumptions regarding speed, altitude, and engagement control. By delivering sustained performance advantages, facilitated by careful engineering and high-octane fuel logistics, the Mustang demonstrated the interplay between technological innovation and operational psychology. German commanders, who had dismissed the aircraft at its introduction, were confronted with evidence that challenged the very foundations of their strategic worldview. The story of the Mustang is thus not only one of engineering triumph, but of profound irony. An aircraft initially considered overrated became a decisive factor in establishing air superiority over Europe. The combination of precise aerodynamic design, high-performance engines, logistical foresight, and disciplined pilot training created a force multiplier whose effects were felt at both tactical and strategic levels. German commanders, despite their experience and acumen, were forced to recognize the limitations of doctrine when confronted with material and operational realities beyond prior expectations. By the spring of 1945, the Mustang had secured its place in aviation history. Operational records indicate that P-51 equipped units escorted thousands of bomber missions with markedly reduced losses, contributed to the attrition of the Luftwaffe's remaining operational fighters, and facilitated strategic bombing campaigns that crippled German industrial output. In memoirs, intelligence assessments, and post-war analyses, the aircraft is consistently noted for its combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and psychological impact, an integrated outcome rarely achieved in wartime aviation. Ultimately, the Mustang's narrative exemplifies a convergence of engineering brilliance, operational insight, and strategic foresight. It transformed the European air war, compelled the German command to confront an inconvenient truth, and underscored the essential principle that technological advantage, when properly integrated with training and logistics, can decisively influence the course of conflict. The aircraft that German commanders had once dismissed as overrated had, in fact, delivered a sustained, multifaceted superiority that would resonate long after the last mission had flown. Reflecting on this history, one is struck not only by the Mustang's technical achievements, but by the human dimension of perception and adaptation in war. The initial dismissal by German commanders illustrates a recurring theme in military history. Even experienced, highly trained individuals are vulnerable to entrenched assumptions, particularly when confronted with unexpected innovations. The Mustang's success did not rely solely on superior numbers or firepower. It relied on a systematic understanding of aerodynamics, fuel chemistry, and strategic application, combined with disciplined execution of tactics that leveraged these advantages. The story of the P-51 Mustang, from skepticism to dominance, thus serves as both a technical case study and a profound lesson in the interplay between expectation and reality in warfare. It highlights how a single innovation, carefully developed and effectively applied, can redefine operational paradigms, compel adaptation, and ultimately alter the trajectory of conflict. For German commanders who had underestimated it, the Mustang became a symbol of both technological ingenuity and the peril of disregarding empirical evidence, a reminder that, in war, as in history, assumptions are often more dangerous than enemy action. The war in Europe entered its final phases by early 1945, and yet the legacy of the P-51 Mustang continued to reverberate across every theatre it had touched. For the Allied forces, the Mustang was no longer simply a fighter aircraft. It had become an emblem of engineering foresight, logistical precision, and the intersection of human skill and technological innovation. For the Luftwaffe, it was a symbol of miscalculation and the unyielding consequences of underestimating an opponent. What had begun as a tactical encounter over the skies of Germany had evolved into a strategic lesson with far-reaching implications for military doctrine, industrial policy, and even the psychology of command. German pilots who had once sneered at the Mustang as overrated were forced, through repeated combat experience, to reconcile their assumptions with reality. They encountered a machine that combined raw speed, remarkable maneuverability, and operational endurance in ways they had not imagined possible. For example, by 1944, the 4th Fighter Group routinely flew missions covering 600 to 700 miles round-trip, maintaining formation integrity over hostile airspace. German aces reported that even when they managed to close on the Mustangs, energy, retention, and acceleration allowed American pilots to disengage effortlessly. Engagements that might have lasted mere minutes in previous years now stretched into extended pursuits, where German aircraft found themselves reacting to moves dictated by the Mustang's superior capabilities. This cognitive dissonance had profound implications. Commanders who had relied on doctrine built from years of experience, training, and intelligence reports discovered that assumptions once considered reliable could no longer be trusted. One post-war analysis of Luftwaffe mission logs from 1944 observed that even aces with hundreds of victories hesitated, waiting for an opening that rarely appeared. The Mustang forced us to fight defensively, to react rather than act. The psychological strain of being unable to regain initiative created a cascade effect, influencing training, tactics, and morale. The very belief in control over the air had been undermined by an aircraft, whose design, fuel, and pilot training were meticulously integrated to exploit gaps in German expectations. The Mustang's dominance also underscored the profound relationship between innovation and industrial capacity. While German engineers had pursued high-performance fighters and experimental designs, their efforts were constrained by resource scarcity and Allied bombing campaigns. Fuel shortages, particularly of high-octane variants required for top performance, limited the deployment of late-war aircraft such as the Ta-152 or the Focke-Wulf 190D. The Mustang, by contrast, benefited from the United States' immense industrial base, a decentralized network of refineries producing grade 150 aviation gasoline and streamlined assembly lines that allowed rapid replacement of losses. This combination of production scale, technological sophistication, and operational planning created a multiplier effect. The aircraft itself was potent, but its strategic impact was amplified by the capacity to sustain and deploy it consistently. The human element was equally significant. Pilots trained on the Mustang were instructed not merely to fly, but to exploit its technical advantages fully. Energy management balancing speed, altitude, and maneuvering to maintain the upper hand was drilled relentlessly. Formation flying emphasized both offensive flexibility and defensive coverage, allowing small units to exert disproportionate influence over larger enemy formations. Accounts from American veterans emphasize how this training, paired with the aircraft's inherent capabilities, gave them confidence in combat scenarios where other fighter pilots might have been tentative. The combination of human skill and technological superiority created what could be described as a psychological edge, enabling pilots to operate with initiative and resilience in the face of formidable opposition. From the German perspective, the Mustang forced an acute reassessment of both doctrine and expectations. Intelligence reports, previously dismissive, had to be revised to reflect the aircraft's true capabilities. Operational manuals were rewritten to stress evasion and coordinated defense rather than aggressive interception. Yet even with these adaptations, the structural limitations imposed by fuel shortages, pilot attrition, and disrupted industrial production meant that German forces could not close the gap. The Mustang had introduced a disruptive variable, an aircraft that could dictate the terms of engagement which the Luftwaffe could not neutralize without fundamental changes to strategy and production, changes impossible under wartime constraints. In strategic terms, the Mustang's influence extended beyond the immediate air battles over Germany. By providing long-range escort to bomber formations, it enabled sustained strategic bombardment campaigns that systematically degraded German industrial capacity. Cities such as Hamburg, Kassel, and Berlin faced repeated air raids with reduced bomber attrition, directly impacting the production of tanks, artillery, and aircraft. The Luftwaffe's inability to regain air superiority meant that the Allies could operate with relative freedom at altitudes and ranges previously considered too dangerous. In effect, a single aircraft, carefully designed, engineered, and deployed, had altered the operational landscape of an entire theatre of war. The irony of the Mustang's legacy is particularly striking when considered in the context of German commanders' initial assessments. To have labelled the aircraft overrated was to underestimate not merely its raw performance, but the integrated system of engineering, fuel, training, and operational doctrine that supported it. The Americans had effectively engineered a force multiplier, one that reshaped both the material and psychological dimensions of combat. By 1945, the term overrated was no longer found in German documents. What remained was an understanding that the Mustang represented an innovation that could not be countered easily, one that demanded adaptation in the face of overwhelming evidence. Even after the war, the Mustang's reputation persisted, both in technical analysis and in the memoirs of those who had encountered it. Luftwaffe pilots, including aces such as Heinz Baer and Walter Krupinski, reflected on the aircraft with a mixture of respect and frustration, noting how its design, speed, and operational range consistently forced them into defensive postures. American veterans, in contrast, emphasized the combination of rigorous training, disciplined formation tactics, and high-performance engineering as the keys to their success. Collectively, these perspectives illuminate the central lesson. The Mustang was not merely an airplane, but a system in which human, technical, and logistical elements converged to create a decisive advantage. In analyzing the P-51's broader significance, several factors emerge as particularly noteworthy. First, the aircraft demonstrated the importance of integrating technological innovation with practical operational deployment. The Mustang's advantages were not theoretical. They were realized in every mission flown, every engagement fought, and every strategic outcome influenced. Second, it revealed the dangers of underestimation in warfare. German commanders, relying on outdated assumptions and incomplete intelligence, suffered both tactical and psychological consequences when faced with an adversary who had anticipated and corrected for their expectations. Finally, the Mustang's story highlights the interplay between material superiority and human adaptation. Even the most skilled pilots, when confronted with a consistently superior platform, were compelled to modify their behavior, demonstrating the profound influence of technology on human decision-making in combat. The enduring legacy of the Mustang extends beyond its immediate wartime impact. In the post-war period, it became a benchmark for fighter design, influencing both American and European aviation programs. Engineers and military theorists studied its laminar flow wing, engine integration, and fuel optimization as examples of how careful design could yield disproportionate operational effects. Its performance characteristics informed the development of jet aircraft in the late 1940s and 1950s, establishing principles that remain relevant in contemporary aerodynamics and combat planning. Yet perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Mustang's story is its human dimension, the way it reshaped perception, altered expectations, and forced a re-evaluation of what was possible in aerial warfare. German commanders, initially dismissive, were confronted with a machine that defied their calculations and forced adaptive thinking. American pilots, trained to exploit the aircraft's strengths fully, demonstrated the synergy between human skill and technological innovation. The narrative of the P-51 thus becomes not merely a story of engineering excellence, but a meditation on human judgment, foresight, and the consequences of underestimating an opponent. In conclusion, the P-51 Mustang's place in history is secured not only by the number of missions flown or enemy aircraft destroyed, but by the profound disruption it imposed on German expectations and doctrine. What was once labelled overrated became emblematic of decisive integrated innovation. The aircraft's design, fuel efficiency, range, and speed, combined with disciplined training and strategic deployment, created a system whose impact was felt at tactical, operational, and strategic levels. It stands as a testament to the power of foresight, the importance of challenging assumptions, and the enduring truth that in war, the measure of a weapon is not only in its specifications, but in the ways it shapes the human mind and the tenfold course of events it encounters. The Mustang's story is therefore both technical and profoundly human. It is the story of engineers, pilots, and strategists who, through vision, diligence, and audacity, produced a tool that would redefine aerial combat. It is the story of adversaries who learned, often too late, that assumptions, even those held by the most experienced commanders, can be fatal when confronted by unforeseen innovation. And above all, it is the story of an aircraft that transformed the skies of Europe, leaving an indelible mark on history, not through spectacle or bravado, but through relentless, disciplined excellence and the quiet, inevitable revelation of truth in the face of doubt. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.